Is anyone still out there? If you're hearing this, you're one of the lucky ones. Or maybe the unlucky ones. I guess that depends on how you look at it. Right now, it's hard to say which one of us is winning this war. Let me start from the beginning. The day everything changed. When the world fell silent. It happened so fast I almost didn't notice at first. The sun was setting, normal enough, right? And then, out of nowhere, the birds stopped singing. No chirping, no calls, not even the soft rustle of wings. Just nothing. Complete silence. At first, I thought maybe they'd just all flown off. Some strange migration, perhaps. But this silence, it wasn't natural. I went outside, my usual evening routine, and the air felt wrong. Like the whole world had just held its breath. The dogs next door started barking, then suddenly stopped too, their own confusion echoing across the stillness. It wasn't until I looked up, really looked up, that I noticed it. The sky was empty. No birds, no crows, no sparrows darting across the orange glow of dusk. Just a vast, unbroken expanse of blue. You probably think I'm exaggerating. I wish I was. But if you're hearing this, then you know exactly what I mean. By morning, it wasn't just my neighborhood, it was everywhere. People were staring at their phones, hearing the same reports, baffled, panicked, maybe even a little afraid. Birds weren't just missing from the cities, they were gone from the forests, the mountains, the plains, everywhere. A wave of quiet spread across the world, and I'm not talking about the kind of peace you get when you're meditating. This was the kind of silence that felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then the news came. You heard it, right? The broadcast started telling us what no one wanted to hear. The birds gone, just like that. Not a single one left. The report said it was global, that it wasn't a regional thing, that all species, songbirds, crows, migratory birds, every last one of them had just vanished overnight. Some people think it's a freak accident. Others point to climate change or maybe a disease. Whatever it is, no one knows why they disappeared. But the more I see, the more I know. This is no accident. The thing is, you don't realize how much you rely on birds until they're gone. It's like we didn't even know they were holding everything together. In the first few days, no one could figure out what was happening or why. The sky stayed empty, and so did the trees. People tried to keep their routines, but something felt off. It was like waking up in a dream. But it wasn't the kind of dream you want. By the end of day 3, something else started happening. Animals, those that depended on birds, started acting strange. The predators seemed confused, their food sources disappearing. Then, without warning, a chain reaction kicked off, and the food web began to collapse. Small creatures started running out of things to eat. Plants were left without pollinators. It didn't take long before people started to notice the effects in their own lives. I'm not sure what's worse, the fact that the birds are gone, or that we didn't realize how much they meant until they vanished. I've seen it. People trying to figure out what's happening. There's a woman in New York. Told me she went out to the park, hoping to see a few pigeons at least. But there was nothing, not a single one in sight, not a single bird. She said it felt like the world was upside down. She's not wrong. It's like the earth itself is unbalanced now. But let me tell you this. We're still here. You're still listening, right? That means we're still alive. And for now, that's all we've got. I'm not sure where this is going, if anyone even knows. Maybe some of you out there are hoping for answers. Maybe you're waiting for the world to make sense of it. But I've got a feeling that, like me, you've come to realize that we might never get an answer to this one. Not right away, at least. So, what happens now? The way I see it, we're at the beginning of something bigger than we can understand. You're probably wondering how things could get worse, right? Trust me, they will. But it's not all bad news. At least, not yet. Stay with me. Let me tell you what I've seen so far. That's good. I think we're all gonna need each other for this. I can't promise I have all the answers, but I do know one thing. It's not just the birds that have disappeared. It's everything we thought we knew about how the world works. The first sign that things were really changing. People started panicking. I don't mean the kind of panic where you just run around in circles. No, this was the kind of panic that hit you right in your gut. People were looking around at each other like, how did we miss this? How did we let this happen? I remember walking through the city streets, well, what was left of them. At first, everything was eerily calm, almost like the whole world had slowed down. But as the days passed, you could feel the tension rising. You could hear it in the way people spoke. The worry in their voices, the little things they weren't saying aloud. The silence left by the birds wasn't the only silence hanging in the air anymore. You could feel it inside your bones, in your chest, that pressure building. And then, that night, when the first storm hit, it was sudden, unexpected, wasn't even supposed to be a big one. But with the weather systems all out of whack, thanks to the whole food chain starting to collapse, this thing hit hard. Rain pouring down, winds howling like they were angry at us, and people started to realize just how fragile everything had been. There was a man I met at a shelter in Chicago, a father. He said he couldn't get through to his sister in another state, that the phone lines were down. I don't know what happened to him after that. He was one of the last people I saw before things went dark in that town. But I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was this mixture of fear and confusion, like he couldn't quite grasp what had just been ripped away from him. He didn't even care about the phones anymore. All he wanted was to know where his sister was. The truth is, we didn't think about birds much, did we? Not until they were gone. You know, it's like we just assumed they'd always be there singing in the trees or flying by our windows. But when they disappeared, we started seeing the cracks in everything. Farmers were the first ones to really get hit hard. Without birds to control pests, crops were getting overrun by insects. Bees couldn't manage to pollinate the way they used to either. The disruption was immediate, and it spread like wildfire. And that's where people started to realize this wasn't just about the birds. This was about the entire web of life. We took it all for granted. I know you're probably asking, well, what did the government do? What about the scientists? Well, they tried. But here's the thing. This wasn't some localized disaster where you could just send in a few teams and fix it. No one could make sense of what was happening. Countries started issuing emergency measures, but without those birds in the sky, without nature's checks and balances, there was no way to stop the chain reaction. It was like the system itself was failing. A lot of people just stopped going to work. You get it, right? How can you keep going about your day when the thing that's been holding the planet together is just gone? You'd see people walking down the streets, staring at the empty sky, trying to figure out how the world could go on without its song. I saw one woman in LA, a teacher, who couldn't keep it together. She had her kids in the classroom for a while, but the tension in the air was too much. They couldn't focus. They couldn't hear her. It wasn't just the birds that were gone, it was the sense of normality. That stable feeling that lets you wake up and think, okay, here's another day. And you know what? That's when people started to panic. Really panic. They didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't know how to live in a world that wasn't operating the way it was supposed to. We're all still trying to figure that out. Trying to figure out if there's any way to survive this. I met a family in a makeshift shelter. 2 parents and a little girl, about 8 years old. The mom was crying because her daughter was asking about the birds. She had never heard of such a world without them. The dad tried to reassure her, saying that maybe the birds would come back soon. But the truth was, none of us knew. Not even the scientists. The birds didn't just disappear in a day. They vanished over the course of one night. And no one had any idea where they'd gone or why. It wasn't just people that were suffering, though. It was the land, too. Plants were dying off because they weren't getting pollinated. Animals who once depended on the seeds and insects the birds kept in check were starting to starve. The ecosystem was crumbling, one piece at a time. And the worst part, you could feel it in the air, the weight of everything that was falling apart. The truth is, the birds weren't just gone. They were the glue holding everything together. The more you look at it, the more you realize they were more important than we gave them credit for. I know you're probably thinking it sounds bleak, and you're right. It is, but we've got to keep going. We have to. If you're still listening, that means you're surviving. And if we're surviving, there's still a chance we can fix this. Stay tuned. Because in the next few hours, we're going to try to make sense of all of this. There's more to this story than what we're seeing right now. And maybe, just maybe, there's hope, even if it doesn't feel like it. Okay, I'm back. I know it's been a lot to process. Honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it too. But we can't sit here in the dark forever. You and I both know things are only getting worse, and we've got to face it. The birds are gone, and with them, a whole lot more than just their songs. You want to know how bad it's gotten? It's not just a local problem anymore. This thing, it's global. The impact of the bird disappearance is spreading like wildfire, and no one's really prepared for it. Every corner of the earth is feeling the heat. I don't know about you, but I didn't think about birds much before. You don't miss something until it's gone. And now I'm realizing just how much they were holding everything up. All around the world, governments are scrambling to understand the magnitude of what's happening. And guess what? They're coming up short. Nothing makes sense. In Europe, the crops are failing. In Africa, farmers are watching their fields turn to dust because there's no one left to control the pests. The entire agricultural system is shaking, and no one has a solution. And those of us who thought the city was the safest place, we're starting to feel the cracks. Take New York City, for example. Once you couldn't walk 2 blocks without hearing a bird somewhere. Even in the busiest parts of Manhattan, you'd hear pigeons or sparrows or starlings. It's a city that's built on chaos, but there was always something, some sign of life among the skyscrapers. Not anymore. That eerie quiet we talked about has become a permanent fixture now. And it's not just the farms or the cities, it's the wildlife too. The ones that were already struggling, some of them are barely holding on. I heard about a sanctuary in Arizona where they were trying to protect the last few wild birds left, but there was nothing they could do. When the disease, or whatever it is, spread, even the sanctuaries couldn't keep them safe. The wildlife experts, they were stumped. No answers. Only empty enclosures, broken hearts, and the sound of wind rushing through trees where there should have been a chorus of wings. It's the same story everywhere, I've heard. Australia, too. In places like the outback, they're seeing predators turn on each other because they have no birds to hunt, no prey to stalk. The predators are hungry, confused, and desperate. They don't know how to adapt, and neither do we. Nature has never had to face anything like this. It's like we've all been cast adrift in this endless void where the rules don't apply anymore. Here's the thing, the ripple effects aren't stopping at nature's door. They're knocking on humanity's too. The markets are in chaos. There's no easy way to replace what the birds did for the ecosystem. People are starting to realize we're not just missing something small. We're missing something vital. It's like losing a key ingredient from a recipe. Without it, everything falls apart. And then there's the panic. Have you noticed it yet? How people are starting to turn on each other. Not in any big dramatic way. Not yet anyway, but it's there. The edges are starting to fray. People are hoarding food, scrambling for supplies, trying to find a way to survive when everything around them is falling apart. Some of us are looking for the next big crisis, wondering when it'll hit. Others are just trying to make sense of it all. One thing's for sure, no one is talking about what happens when the birds come back. The idea of them returning has become something like a dream now. People are more focused on trying to stay alive, trying to hold on to whatever scraps of normalcy are left. I was in a town in the Midwest last week, talking to a man who runs a small store. He was sitting behind the counter, looking out the window at the empty sky. He told me he used to sell the bird feed. That's what kept his store running. People would come in, buy bags of seeds, and he'd say something like, "Have a good day," or "Hope the birds like it." Now, nothing. His shelves were empty. Not from customers. He hadn't sold a bag of feed in weeks. The reality is setting in for a lot of people, whether they want to admit it or not. The birds are part of something bigger. They were the linchpins of the food web, and without them, well, we're already starting to see the collapse. This crisis, it's escalating fast, and I don't have a neat, hopeful answer for you. I'm just trying to get by. The same as you. But we've got to face facts. People are starting to panic, and governments, they're at a loss. The power's out in so many places, and when it's on, it's spotty at best. Communication is becoming more and more of a gamble. The real kicker, though, no one can even agree on how to solve this. And the ones who claim they have the answer, they're still too far behind the curve. Some say it's a weather anomaly. Some say it's a virus. Others, they're talking about alien interference, about some kind of cosmic event that snatched the birds away. I've heard it all in the past few days, and the truth is, none of it matters anymore. It's a race against time now. We don't need more theories. We need solutions. The scariest thing, no one knows what's coming next. Not really. The systems are collapsing, and we're all riding on the edge of this thing, wondering how much further we can go before we hit the ground. I'm not trying to scare you. I just need you to understand how deep this goes. We're all in this together, and if we're going to get out, we need to face it head on. I'm not going to lie to you. This has been harder than I thought. It's one thing to talk about the birds, the ecosystems, the food chains, but it's another thing to talk about the people, the ones who are living through this day in and day out. You probably don't need me to tell you that there's a psychological toll here. We're all feeling it. I've been hearing from survivors, from regular folks who are trying to keep their heads above water. And the stories I'm hearing, they're raw, real. The psychological effects of the bird disappearance are more than just anxiety about the environment. They're about losing something that you didn't even realize you depended on until it was gone. It's like waking up to a world that doesn't make sense anymore. There's a woman I spoke to in New York, a therapist by trade, who's been seeing patients who are struggling with what she calls grief without closure. She told me, it's like mourning for something you never even knew you had. And I get that. Birds were such a part of our world, our everyday lives, that we didn't even stop to appreciate them. Now, with the skies silent, we're left with this deep ache, this weird hole where something should be. But it's more than just missing. The sound of a songbird, or the sight of a crow flying by. It's deeper. It's as if we're mourning a part of ourselves. What does it say about us that we let our environment get to this point? What does it mean when something as fundamental as life on Earth starts to unravel? People are starting to feel more than just sadness. It's uncertainty. It's fear. There's this constant undercurrent of anxiety that's hard to shake. I talked to a nurse in Ohio who's been working in the emergency room since the power went out. She told me, I used to rely on the birds to help me feel connected to something bigger. Now, everything feels disconnected. I'm losing track of time. I'm losing track of everything. She's not alone. The thing about fear, though, is that it's contagious. It spreads like wildfire. I've seen it in the faces of people who were once optimistic, hopeful. Now, there's a weariness in their eyes, and I don't blame them. After all, when the systems we rely on begin to break down, you start to ask yourself, what else is going to disappear? And it's not just the people in cities. It's everywhere. Out in the more remote areas, there's this eerie silence that's unsettling in a different way. The farmer I spoke with earlier, the one whose crops were ruined by locusts, he told me that he and his neighbors have started to avoid looking at each other. He said it's like we're all in the same sinking ship, but nobody wants to admit it. They're stuck between the physical survival of their land and the emotional strain of their communities. No one knows how to talk about it anymore. There's something else happening too. People are getting more numb. I've been hearing reports of people taking risks they wouldn't have before. People who normally wouldn't venture out after dark, now wandering aimlessly through their towns. The boundaries of personal safety are starting to slip. Maybe it's desperation, or maybe it's the realization that the rules we used to live by don't seem to apply anymore. If a bird can disappear from the sky in the blink of an eye, what's to stop anything else from vanishing? It's hard to describe, but it's as if we're all in some collective trance, waiting for the next thing to go wrong. And the worst part? Some people have started to accept it. The thought that this might be the new normal. I spoke with a high school teacher in Maine who told me, we're all just waiting for the other shoe to drop, aren't we? It's like we've given up on getting answers. She's right. I think a lot of people are starting to wonder whether answers even matter anymore. How do you prepare for a future when you don't even know what's left to hope for? But then, there's this other side to it. I've heard whispers about people turning to rituals, finding comfort in traditions that don't need to be explained. I know it sounds strange, but there are communities, small ones mostly, that are gathering together to honor the birds in some way, holding vigils, singing songs, leaving food offerings at birdhouses or tree stumps. It's almost like a quiet rebellion against the darkness. It's like they're saying, we remember, we won't forget. Maybe that's what we all need, huh? Something to hold on to, a reason to keep going when the world feels like it's slipping through our fingers. Maybe that's what we're all looking for right now. A way to cope. A way to make sense of all this. One thing I do know for sure, the toll this is taking on us isn't going to just go away. It's going to be a long, slow process to heal, if we can heal at all. But maybe that's where we need to start, by admitting that it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to feel afraid. What matters now is what we do with that fear, how we come together, how we rebuild, not just our environments, but our spirits. We can't predict the future, but we can make sure we don't forget the lessons we've learned from this. We can decide how we want to face what's next, together. Stay with me. We've got more to talk about. It's hard to feel optimistic, I know. I've been right there with you, sitting in the silence, trying to make sense of a world that's crumbling in front of our eyes. But listen, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. In times like these, we're not alone. Even when it feels like everything is breaking down, there are pockets of hope. Moments where people are coming together, fighting for a future that still feels possible. You remember that small town I mentioned a few broadcasts ago, over in Alaska? Well, it turns out they've got something going on that's worth sharing. In the heart of the frozen north, where people were already living off the grid, they didn't let the bird crisis tear them apart. They've built these incredible little greenhouses right in the middle of their town square, using scavenged plastic, solar lights, whatever they could find. They're growing food there, tomatoes, kale, lettuce. It's not much, but it's enough to make a difference. And let me tell you, the sense of accomplishment, it's everything. That's the thing about small victories. They don't always make the headlines, but they're what keep us going. People are finding ways to adapt, to survive. I spoke to a woman in California who runs a community kitchen. She's been using whatever she can find to create meals for those who have lost their jobs, their homes. She said, I may not have all the ingredients I'm used to, but I can still feed my neighbors. She's right. She's showing the rest of us that you don't need everything to make something meaningful. And it's not just about food, it's about people looking out for each other, lending a hand when someone else needs it. There's a group of engineers in Texas who have turned an old factory into a water purification station, collecting rainwater and filtering it for the community. They've set up a small exchange system where people can trade goods and services in a world where currency has lost some of its value. They're not just surviving, they're helping others survive too. It's a small-scale revolution, really. A grassroots movement that's growing, even in the midst of the chaos. There are so many of these stories, little sparks of light in the dark. You just have to look for them. In the past, we might have brushed these things off because we had the luxury of ignoring what we didn't see in our own backyard. But now it's those small victories that are keeping us all tethered to the possibility of something better. Here's the truth. There's no single answer to this crisis. There's no one person or government that can step in and fix it all. But you know what we can do? We can rebuild it ourselves, one step at a time. We can create these small networks of support, of communities helping one another, learning from each other, and doing whatever they can to make life a little easier. It might not seem like much in the grand scheme of things, but I've seen enough of it to know that this is what will carry us through. This is what gives us hope. You see, survival isn't just about holding on to what we used to have. It's about finding new ways to live, new ways to connect, and that's what's happening all around us. I know it's not always easy to see through the fog of fear and grief. It's hard to believe there's a way forward when the world feels upside down. But if we keep holding on to those small victories, we might just find a way to build something new. Maybe that's what the future is, 1,000 little victories that build into something big. So, to everyone out there, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for holding on, for doing what you can, for being part of this community. No matter how small or scattered it may seem, because right now, that's what matters most. We're all in this together, and every act of kindness, every small victory, it counts. And in the end, it's going to be those small acts that save us. I'll be honest, after everything we've been through, after all the grief and the fear, I think we all want answers. We're looking for something, anything, that can explain this nightmare. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance we might find a way out. Now, I've been reaching out to some of the brightest minds in the world, trying to get a grasp on this. Scientists, biologists, environmentalists, they're all scrambling to figure out what happened. It's like watching a game of chess played out on a giant, unpredictable board. The problem is nobody has a clear picture yet. No one can say for sure why the birds disappeared, or more importantly, how we fix it. But that doesn't mean they're not trying. Researchers are pouring through everything they can, looking for patterns, for clues, for anything that could explain the sudden global vanishing act. And I know this is going to sound strange, but some of the theories are pretty wild. One of the most talked about ideas is a mass electromagnetic pulse, an EMP event. Now, I know it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but there's a possibility that a massive, invisible disruption in the Earth's magnetic field could have scrambled the navigational systems that birds rely on. The theory is that birds, especially migratory species, use the Earth's magnetic fields to guide their flight paths. If something happened to disrupt that, if there was a pulse of energy from the sun, or some kind of cosmic anomaly, it could explain why they just vanished. It's a long shot, but it's something scientists are considering. There's another theory that's a bit more grounded: environmental collapse. We've all seen the changes in the weather, the storms, the temperature shifts, the unpredictable seasons. Some believe that the rapidly shifting climate, combined with widespread deforestation, might have created an environment so unstable that birds simply couldn't survive. In the absence of stable ecosystems, food chains break down and migratory routes become impossible to follow. In essence, this theory argues that the disappearance is a direct result of years, decades of environmental degradation. A third theory that's gaining traction is one tied to disease. There are whispers of a viral outbreak that only affected birds, a new strain of illness that spread rapidly and wiped out entire populations. But here's the kicker. What if it didn't stop with the birds? What if this disease is still out there, dormant, waiting to affect other species, including humans? It's terrifying, and it's something that health experts are watching closely. But right now, it's just another possibility, another piece of the puzzle that might explain this chaos. Of course, we can't forget about the potential for a biological weapon, as much as it pains me to even think about it. Some are suggesting that this could be an act of sabotage, a man-made disaster that targeted the birds, whether intentionally or as a side effect of some larger experiment. It's disturbing to consider, but we can't ignore it. So, what's the answer? Well, no one has it. Not yet. But these scientists and experts, they're working day and night, analyzing data, testing theories, and looking for any sign of life out there. They're still tracking the surviving species, trying to figure out how animals that depend on birds for food, like certain rodents and even some fish, are adapting to their sudden absence. But as much as they're learning, they're also realizing that the clock is ticking. There are some promising solutions being tested, though. People are starting to create artificial habitats for the few birds that have survived, environments that mimic the natural world as closely as possible. I've heard of folks in Oregon who've set up bird havens using technology to control climate and food sources, hoping to nurture the few remaining populations back into strength. They're using drones to help recreate migration patterns, things that were once thought impossible. And there are other projects underway to restore ecosystems in new ways. Some places are experimenting with reintroducing species that could fill the void left by birds. For example, small mammals that once lived in harmony with birds are being relocated to new areas where they can help pollinate plants and control insects. It's not a perfect fix, but it's progress. It's a start. But what does all of this mean for us? For you, listening at home or wherever you might be? Well, it means that we're not without hope. As long as there are people out there trying to find answers, we're not entirely lost. We've still got a chance. Maybe not to bring back what we had, but to create something new. Something that can survive in this new world we're facing. I won't pretend like it's all going to be fine overnight. I won't pretend we have all the answers yet. But I will tell you this. There's a lot of work being done. People are innovating, adapting, testing new ideas. The key now is patience and trust. Trust that there are still those out there who care. Trust that we're not alone in this fight. We're going to have to keep watching, keep listening, and keep looking for those small signs of recovery. Maybe, just maybe, that's how we find our way forward. But I can promise you this, it's going to be a hell of a journey. We've talked about the theories, the loss, the grief, and the small victories. Now, let's talk about the future. How do we survive this? I know you're probably thinking, can we? But I'm here to tell you, we can. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. But survival isn't just about scraping by. It's about adapting. It's about creating something new from what we've got left. Here's the thing. This world we've woken up to, it's not the one we grew up with. There's no sugarcoating that. But there's also something we've got that the birds didn't. Our brains. We've been through tough times before, and we're still here. We know how to adapt, and we're going to need every ounce of that survival instinct now. I've been talking to people who've been living in the thick of this, places where the birds disappeared weeks ago, months ago. They're starting to form plans. They're starting to build strategies for living in this strange, birdless world. First things first, food. I know it sounds basic, but with the loss of the birds, many ecosystems are in free fall. Pollinators are disappearing, and crop systems are starting to fail. But here's the thing, people are innovating. In places like Maine, farmers are turning to hydroponic systems, growing crops indoors without soil, using nutrient-rich water instead of relying on traditional farming. It's resource heavy, but it works. They're making their own mini ecosystems, creating food from nothing. Another method that's gaining traction, vertical farming. In urban areas, people are building small farms up instead of out. They're taking advantage of every inch of space, rooftops, abandoned buildings, even empty parking lots. It's a hustle, but it's a growing one. These urban farmers are taking the pressure off traditional farms, creating more sustainable, localized food systems. And guess what? It's working. In places where food was running low, communities are starting to get back on their feet, one crop at a time. And it's not just food. Water is another huge issue. We've all seen the strain on freshwater supplies since the disappearance of the birds. Streams and rivers that used to be kept in balance by nature are running dry or becoming contaminated. So people are coming up with new ways to capture and purify water. One group in Arizona has been setting up desalination units using solar power to turn salt water into drinkable water. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. But what about the bigger picture? What about society, our infrastructure? This is the hard part. Governments are scrambling, some better than others, but the truth is, we can't rely on them to fix everything. We've got to step up. It's like what I said before, there's no easy solution, no quick fix. We've got to rebuild, one brick at a time, and we're starting to see it happen. Communities are forming cooperatives, people coming together to share resources, knowledge, and skills. The DIY mentality is strong right now. In places like Chicago, community workshops have been set up to teach people how to fix broken electrical systems, how to build solar panels, how to purify water. It's grassroots. It's community driven, but it's happening, and that's what matters. People are even beginning to look at energy in a whole new way. As the power grid falters, more and more survivors are turning to renewable sources, wind turbines, solar panels, and even biogas generators. They're starting small, homes first, then entire neighborhoods, and the hope is it can grow from there. It's not just about surviving. It's about creating something that can last. But what about the mental toll? What about the despair that sets in after weeks or months without answers? Well, I'll tell you something. People are finding ways to cope. Support groups have popped up, online and in person, where people can share their stories, their fears, their frustrations. There's a solidarity growing that we didn't have before, a shared understanding of what it means to live in a world that's been irrevocably changed. And I'll tell you, there's power in that. The power of not being alone. Look, we're not there yet. I won't lie and tell you that we're on the brink of some great societal rebirth. But we're making progress. It's happening quietly in the background. People are adapting, they're learning, they're surviving. And the more we do that, the more we can build something lasting. So yeah, maybe it feels like we're stumbling in the dark. Maybe we don't know what tomorrow will bring. But here's the thing. Every step we take together makes that darkness just a little bit smaller. Every day we live, every new idea we try is one more step toward making it through. One more piece of the puzzle. We don't know what the end of this looks like, but we know one thing for sure. We're not going down without a fight. And as long as we keep fighting, there's hope. Hold on. We're almost there. Well, here we are. The final stretch. And if you're still with me, if you're still listening, then that means we've made it through something together. Through all the chaos, the confusion, the fear, and the uncertainty, we're still here. And that's something worth holding on to. We've talked about the disappearance, the birds that vanished without a trace, taking with them so much more than just a few creatures. We've shared the stories of people who fought, who innovated, who found ways to survive, even when it felt like the world was falling apart. We've looked at the theories, the science, and the raw human moments that define this strange, painful journey. But I think the most important thing we've learned, the thing that I keep coming back to, is that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way forward. It may not look like what we thought it would, but that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. You see, survival isn't just about getting through the day. It's about finding meaning in what's left. It's about creating new ways to live, new ways to connect, new ways to rebuild what's been lost. We're doing that now together. We're taking the pieces of this broken world and making something that can endure, something that can grow. And sure, it's hard. Some days, it feels like we're running on fumes. It feels like the silence is never ending, and the losses are too great to bear. But if we've learned anything, it's that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about facing it. It's about taking the hits and coming back stronger, more determined. The birds may be gone. Their songs, their flights across the sky, they're gone. But that doesn't mean we have to give up the world they left behind. We can still live with purpose. We can still honor what they gave us by creating something new. A new world, a new way of living, a new story that we write with every step we take. And maybe, just maybe, the birds didn't disappear without reason. Maybe they were telling us something. Maybe in their absence, they've opened our eyes to the fragility of everything we've taken for granted. Maybe they're asking us to rebuild, to care, to work together, and heal the wounds we've inflicted on this planet. The question now is, will we listen? Look, I won't pretend to know exactly what tomorrow holds. I can't promise that everything will be okay. That's not something I can offer. But I will tell you this, we're not alone. We've never been alone. And the more we remember that, the stronger we become. So, as we move forward, let's keep building. Let's keep supporting each other, no matter how hard it gets. Let's keep finding new ways to thrive. The birds may not be with us, but we're still here. And as long as we're here, we've got a chance. This isn't the end. Not for us. Not by a long shot. It's just the beginning of something new. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that even in the face of loss, there's always the possibility of rebirth. We just have to choose it. We have to be brave enough to rebuild. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with me, for listening, for surviving, and for keeping hope alive. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I want you to know one thing. You're part of something bigger, and that matters more than anything. Stay safe. Stay strong. And remember, no matter how dark it gets, the light can always find its way through. This is not the end, it's just the beginning. Good night, and may the silence one day be filled with new songs. As we wrap up today's broadcast, I want to leave you with this thought. Despite the darkness we face, despite everything we've lost, there's still hope. We're still here. And as long as we keep moving forward, keep building, keep remembering each other, we're not truly lost. No matter what the world looks like around us, there's always something worth fighting for, always something worth remembering. So let's keep going, together. Even when things feel uncertain, remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. We might not have the past, but we have today, and that's enough to make tomorrow worth living for. Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this broadcast, if it helped you feel connected or maybe just a little less alone, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us, and if you want to hear more of these daily broadcasts, you can also support us by clicking the join button on our channel. Every bit of your support helps us keep going, keep sharing, and keep telling the stories that matter. Until next time, keep safe, keep strong, and remember, even in the silence, we are still here. You're still here, and that's all we need to keep moving forward. See you soon.